IVM.
Hey everybody, quick request once again, if you could help us out by filling out our survey. It's at ivmpodcast.com/survey. This really helps us talk to advertisers about the kinds of people listening to these shows. Really do appreciate your help, and we're going to be doing a random drawing, and we'll be sending out some IVM swag. Hope you enjoy that.
Hello and welcome to another episode of The Origin of Things. A quick apology for there not being an episode last week. I was extremely busy, but I hope you enjoy this week's, which I am pretty kicked about and I've been looking to write for a long time. And thank you for listening to The Origin of Things all year. As always, my only request is that you pass it on to a friend or leave the show a review. It would mean an absolute lot. Or hey, if you can't do that, just ping me. My social links are in the show notes. Just ping me and tell me how you like the show, what you like about it, what you'd like to hear, and of course, if you have ideas for other stories. And without any further ado, let us get right into episode number 41. Welcome to The Origin of Things. Episode 41. A Seafarer's Second Career. This is a story about a man called Abel in England. But before we speak about Abel, I need to speak about, ironically enough, the spread of Christianity. And I assure you the name of our protagonist is a complete coincidence. You see, back in the 18th century, there was this evangelical revival in the West, and part of the new religious reawakening was spearheaded by 5 societies. The Society for the Propagation of the Gospel, the London Missionary Society, the Church Missionary Society, the Wesleyan Mission, and the Free Church Mission of Scotland. It's okay if you can't remember all of them because we need to focus on just the 4th one, the Wesleyan Mission. Now, I'm not a particularly religious person, nor am I a scholar of 18th century Christian movements, but I suppose this one was a particularly forgiving one, for they forgave our gentleman Abel. They gave him a job as a librarian. Now, this was important because Abel was a stowaway, kicked out of a ship by an irate English captain, landing up in a city where the Wesleyan Mission had a branch where they were selling their missionary works as literature. Abel, who loved the written word, was unusually well suited to the task of helping the mission out with this task and soon rose up in their ranks to become an important part of their establishment. The establishment itself, though, unfortunately, could not sustain itself for long, selling books, alas. I suppose even in the 18th century, where there was only so much demand for the written religious word, and this was in an age before Netflix. Shocking indeed. Anyway, before the missionaries shut shop, they still had a lot of books lying around, which they didn't know what to do with. Clearly, Abel knew what to do with these things, so the missionaries offered him the whole establishment. Abel accepted, and then began to run things his way by adding in more books. Not exactly the missionary or religious types, but, more literary works, more fiction. And guess what? It worked. Abel's new establishment started gaining a reputation. In fact, such a reputation that it started attracting the biggest names from the British government, which would one day include the Prince of Wales, Queen Elizabeth, and even Clement Attlee. In fact, the Prince of Wales in 1875 would confer upon the store the unsolicited honor of being appointed booksellers to His Royal Highness, as a mark of favor not conferred upon any other firm or bookseller in the country. Wow. Soon, Abel's shop would soon become the largest bookstore in the country. His shop was custom built for books to go along with the zeal of the owner. Reads one account, quoting a local historian, the building was designed specifically to protect its precious stock. The high ceiling allowed the air to circulate in order to reduce mustiness, potentially destructive to books. The number of windows was kept to the bare minimum to protect books from the dust of the unmetalled roads and were decorated with stained glass imported from Europe, Italian marble floors, and a splendid staircase leading to a second floor, adding to the building's ornamentation. End quote. He started doing many interesting things, Abel. It wasn't just one marquee store, but he had branches, and innovatively for the time, he even had them in railway stations, some of which still exist to this day. Soon, Abel's establishment was bought over by the Spencer Group, who own it to this day. In fact, the Spencer Group itself eventually morphed into something called the Amalgamations Group, which does all sorts of things, from making pistons and paints to owning plantations to vehicle parts and even advertising. Abel's prized establishment is still operated by this conglomerate. A conglomerate that, I must add, is headquartered in India. Now, you must be thinking that that's mighty nice. This is another example of us mighty Indians buying out a British company like Tata Steel acquiring Chorus, or Tata Motors acquiring Jaguar and Land Rover, or the BCCI bullying the ICC. No, wait, that does not technically count. I'm sorry, I just got carried away by my patriotic fervor. Anyway, the Amalgamations Group is indeed Indian, and here's my confession, dear listener. So is most of what I spoke about in the story, or rather the setting is Indian. You see, those luminaries like Prince of Wales, Queen Elizabeth and Clement Attlee were, of course, British, and they indeed did visit Abel's shop, but Abel's shop was in Madras, not in Mayfair. And yes, it was a bookseller to His Royal Highness, but when His Royal Highness was visiting India, not England. In fact, it was graced by quite a few Indian luminaries too, including Rajaji, who would become the first Indian Governor-General after the British buggered off, and S. Radhakrishnan, the second President of India, and even the Maharaja of Mysore, J. Vodeyar. As is written in The Better India, it is widely speculated that the mulligatawny soup and Madras curry powder became legacies of the British Raj only after the store first printed their recipes. End quote. It was the largest bookstore in the country, but the country was India and not England. But Abel himself was English, yes. He was born in Kannur from Kerala today. And he did take to the seas, and as an article in Scroll writes, the vagaries of the sea and the rough life evidently didn't appeal to him. When he tried to abandon his ship and return to India, he was caught and compelled to serve out his apprenticeship. A myth or two soon grew, including the fact, as some later somewhat incomplete accounts have it, that he had been a stowaway trying to steal his way into a seaman's career, end quote. And yes, I did use that little white lie about a stowaway rumor in the early part of the story. It just seemed to add to the romance. So it was that Abel found himself post his seafaring career in Madras. Once there, he realized he had the gifts to be a librarian, and the rest of the story does hold up. In fact, such was his fame that before his death at the turn of the 19th century, that he was the Sheriff of Madras. And yes, his bookstore that he started in 1844 is still around today, as are his other branches, including those at railway stations. That's a giveaway, surely. For very few people would have taken a journey on the Indian railways without encountering the legacy of the man who we are talking about today, a man whose love for the written word counted for more than anything else. A man named Abel Joshua Higginbotham. See you next week then with another episode of The Origin of Things. If you like this podcast, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can listen to us and all our shows on the IVM Podcast app or ivmpodcast.com. You can also follow us on social media. We are at IVM Podcast on Twitter and Instagram. If you want to reach out to me, that's Chuck_Gopal on Twitter and Chuck of All Trades on Instagram. All links in the show notes of this episode. See you next week.
I hope you enjoyed that show. If you aren't following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. One more reminder, people, please go to ivmpodcast.com/survey and help us out. It will take you a couple of minutes to fill out this survey, but it really is very, very helpful for us. For the people who do fill out the survey and are willing to drop us their email address, we're going to do a special drawing and send out some IVM swag to everybody. So please do help us out with that. But what a week it's been on the network. There's so many things to talk to you all about. Let me run through some of the biggest highlights really quickly, right? So Sanjay Jha was on Cyrus Says. What an incredible conversation. I mean, I can't say enough about it. Check that out. We had Hansal Mehta on Marukinaya's Note, talking about 1992 Scam. Amazing stuff. We had Vishal Gondal talking to Nikhil Advani about his career in film. On Storytellers and Storysellers, Vineet spoke to Gunjan Arya, the CEO of OML, and Samiksha Unyal from Bacardi about the history of NH7, the Weekender Festival. On Postcards from Nowhere, Utsav had an amazing episode about the Bushmen of Kalahari. Begin the Journey, Ashish Vidyarthi talks about career choices. On Nankari, they talk about cake. What a fun show that was. And on This Round is on Me, we had Dr. Sanjay Arora talking to Gauri about Suburban Diagnostics and Company and what he sees as the future of healthcare in India. And for our Tamil speakers, if you haven't been checking out Sivakami and Sabatam, why haven't you? Please do go check that out. Kavita's doing an amazing job telling that story. And with that, I hope to see you again next week.
Working Monday to Friday glued to your chair making you feel dull? Worry not. Get your 5-minute weekly dose of travel around the world with Postcards from Nowhere. Join me every Thursday as I explore the strange, obscure and fascinating parts of the world and bring out facets of travel you may not have thought of before. You can find us on the IVM Podcast app, website, or wherever you get your podcast from.